Joining me now to talk about this and what it means, not only for Syrians, but also what it means for Iran, what it means for Turkey, what it means for Israel, our strongest ally in the Middle East, as well as the United States. Joining me now is Dr. Walid Ferez, former advisor to President Donald Trump, foreign policy expert. He's joining us from Washington, D.C. He's a professor and author of 15 books. He served as Fox News and Newsmax analyst, and I've worked with him and interviewed him many times when I served at Fox News. He's also co-host of War and Freedom podcast. And then there's Giselle Sharmad, freedom advocate, daughter of German-American journalist Jamshid Jimmy Sharmad. He was executed by the regime on October 28th. I want you to think about that as we get into this discussion. She is also co-host of War and Freedom podcast. Dr. Ferez, Walid, it's good to see you again. And Ms. Sharmad, I'm honored to meet you. And I know that you have not been keen on receiving condolences because you're continuing the fight of your father. But yet I must say I'm sorry to what happened to your father. You've launched Educate America, a platform to reform the United States and us in giving us education from misinformation about the Middle East. And I'd like to get started with the terrible story of what happened to your father, Jimmy, who was suddenly executed by the Islamic regime in Iran on October 28th. Let me ask what it means to you when you see Syria fall and you see how it impacts Iran. What does it state about the fact that your father lost his life under a brutal regime in Iran? How does this all come together for you?
I mean, my father, just as I am, and as many people from the Middle East are freedom advocates. That means we are the ones speaking out against these brutal regimes. The regime in Syria, the Assad regime, was a close ally working together with the Islamic regime in Iran. So these are to us jihadist regimes. Bring on political Islam to wipe out populations to gain power. So we can see right now for the population of Syria, of Lebanon, of Iran, of Afghanistan, the entire Middle East struggling under these horrific regimes over there. And it doesn't just affect the people inside of Iran. As you can see in my father's case, our family lived in Germany for decades and then lived in America for decades. And my father was attacked by the regime here on US soil. They sent assassins to Los Angeles in 2009 to murder my father. And when they were not successful in doing that, they kidnapped my father on a flight overlay and took him to Iran. So we can see that it's not just the people of the Middle East that are suffering. It is journalists, it is advocates, it is politicians here on US soil that have to look out for sleeper cells of the regime, for transnational repression, for threats against our lives. And seeing that it is possible to topple these regimes gives us a lot of hope. But for some people, it is too late for my father. The regime just murdered him a month ago. They held him inside of Iran for 4 years as a hostage. So for 4 years, our administration failed to bring him out, failed to bring him back, while we had deal after deal, negotiation after negotiation with the kidnappers and murderers of my father. He was left there to suffer and eventually to die. And right now that we got the news that he's dead, we still don't see our administration stepping up and bringing him back home. They're absolutely silent about this.
Why do you think the Biden administration has been silent about this?
Well, it's hard to explain it in a very short time, but we can see the differences in how the Biden administration has handled other hostage cases. I'm friends with a lot of hostages who are in Syria, in Gaza, held by Hamas, in Iran. And we've seen that last September, the Biden administration made a deal with the kidnappers of my father, giving them $6 billion in exchange for 5 hostages, while our family completely left out of it. Not just our family, other hostages as well, but we were kept out of the news. The Biden administration didn't talk to us. When we went to the State Department and asked what is going on right before this deal was going to happen, they told us, we're bringing Americans back. Your dad is not one of them, without any explanation. Now, let me explain. The other hostages were very happy that they were brought back. We were happy for every hostage that is brought back. But the other hostages were not at a threat of execution. Why? Because they were business people going to Iran and being arrested over there. My father was a dissident speaking up and against this regime, fighting this regime here from Los Angeles for years. That means they were terrorizing him. They had an interest in murdering him. And the regime put him into a sham trial and gave him the death sentence. So if you have 5 or 6 hostages in a country held by terrorists and one of them has a death sentence, wouldn't you try to get that one out first instead of abandoning him and bringing out others? Because to the regime, when you're not being part of a deal, that means the administration doesn't care about you. That means giving the right to the terrorists to murder this person. This is exactly what happened.
So were they doing this, was Iran doing this because your father's journalistic abilities to actually cite what was going wrong within the regime?
Not only that, my father is by trade, he's a software developer. He created a website in 2007. So that's before we were using Twitter and social media to bring awareness to what is going on in the Middle East. So my father created this portal for the people of Iran to be able to come out and show what is really happening in Iran. You know, the regime invests a lot in propaganda and in trying to say like the Islamic regime is a government and the people of Iran are standing behind this government. We're just like all happy over there. But when you give the people a portal where they can freely talk, where their IP addresses are protected, where they can be anonymous and show videos of what the regime, the brutality of the regime inside of the country, you're using the face of this regime. And that was at a time, and in 2009, when President Obama was very keen on negotiating with the Islamic regime and saying we can talk to these people, we can do the JCPOA, we can get them to abide and like us and negotiate with us, and everything is fine. At the same time, my father is showing through the portal, no, these are terrorists. These are no different than Hamas, than Hezbollah, ISIS, Al Qaeda. These are terrorists. You cannot negotiate with them. So it was not just a thorn in the eyes of the regime that was trying to save face in front of the world. It was also a thorn in the eyes of our administration here at the time, the Obama administration, that was trying to show we can make business and we can do negotiations with terrorists. So both administrations, the Islamic regime and our administration, did not like this portal, did not like this truth to be put out, and were not protecting my father, but were complicit in silencing my father.
Now, while we've seen the breakdown of what's going on in Syria, is it connected in some way to the threats that are against you? Or because I understand that the Iranian regime has also threatened you and put you on notice that you are also someone that they would like to silence.
Let me make it clear, since 2007, since my father created the website, there has been threats on my family. At that time, my father was the only one that was public, so his face was known and everything. But the threats were also against our family here for the last 2 decades living in America. But since 2020, when they kidnapped my father, and I came in front of the cameras and I started speaking up about him, about what's going on in the Middle East, about the corruption of our own administrations, you know, like working together with these regimes, the threats have been more. Since the execution of my father, since October, I get, of course, more messages saying, we got your father. We took him over there. We were able to, you know, torture him for 4 years, even though he's American, even though he's German. Nobody was there to save him. And look what we did to him. You're going to be next. So watch out. You're going to be next. So the threats are very, very high right now. I'm very aware of that. But the problem is when you don't react to these regimes, when you don't hold them accountable for what they did to my father, what they did to other people, what holds them back from repeating it? That is the problem. Nobody has been held accountable. The Biden administration hasn't even talked to me. My president hasn't even talked to me. They don't mention my father's case. You can't see it anywhere in mainstream media. The other hostage families are on CNN, on MSNBC, and all of these like mainstream media use 24/7 being featured, which is fine. That's how it should be, right? Like that's what media is for, to give us a voice, to show what's happening. But my family has been canceled by mainstream media. And that is a big problem, because when people in America don't know what can happen to us, how close this threat is on US soil, we don't know what is happening to us. We don't know what threat we are under. And this is a matter of national security for all of us over here.
Giselle, I want to thank you for bringing this story to light. And Dr. Perez, I want to bring you in as well to talk about what Giselle has been going through, she and her family, and also about the current breaking news, of course, and that is the fall of the Bashar Assad regime in Syria. Describe for me, or explain to me, what the connections are in terms of the totality of what America and even Israel can anticipate from these kinds of regimes that are very problematic to freedom, and certainly will take actions as extreme as what we've seen the Iranian regime do to Giselle's father. And now we've seen how a jihadist group has stepped in to get rid of Bashar Al Assad. Explain this for us. Connect the dots for me.
Well, thank you. On the top, we need to see the big picture. And the big picture is that two dragons, two radical forces coming out of the Middle East. Sometimes they coordinate, sometimes they eat from each other's food, sometimes they go back to coordination. We have to be very attentive to what could happen in the next few months and maybe a couple of years. So you have the Islamic regime, Khomeini's regime of Iran, which like emanates like an empire stretched to Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Gaza, and part of the West Bank, and of course down in the Arabian Peninsula with the Houthis. So they were able to create that continuum, that empire backed by the money they have, the money that they are, extracting from the West, the hostages, among other things, oil, etc. So they were the strongest party, but the jihadi Sunni Salafists, and that would be the Muslim Brotherhood. You and I discussed it for 10 years over interviews, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, etc. One of its branches, because one branch brings about another branch, it's called HTS. And that one is an offshoot of Al-Qaeda, other offshoot of Jaish al-Nusra or Jabhat al-Nusra. All right. So these two forces are competing over the control of the Middle East. In the case of the Islamic Republic of Iran, one of their criminal activities was hostage taking. It's not just hostage taking on the level of families and individuals. The family of Jimmy, and of course Giselle and her other members of the family, were not contacted by the regime. We will release him if you pay us $400,000. That's not the case. That's how our public needs to understand. Those who were contacted are our government, the Western governments, and I'm saying it probably for the first time, there is a third party that played the role of a broker, meaning people who are part of these transactions, commissioners, companies, interests that basically are waiting for the Iran deal to take place. And the money that was extracted and the money that was requested was from the American government, from the US government. So the family couldn't do anything anyway. It's not a movie with the police intervention and regular kidnapping. This is an attack against our national security. So I wanted to make that very clear to the audience. Jimmy, the father of Giselle, was not a regular guy who has been kidnapped somewhere on the Arizona line and police intervenes. No, he is a very important player in the change that could and can still happen inside Iran. He was the equivalent of, let's say, the head of reformers in the Czech Republic, Václav Havel, who was in jail and then got out of jail, and his message contributed to the collapse of the Soviet Union, or Havel, or Václav Havel, and also in South Africa. All those leaders who were left in prison, not because of regular transactions with criminals, but because of the issue. So the reason why, Jimmy, in my view, the way I understood it, not just from the family, my understanding of how the regime acts, it was one of the strategies to get money, to get the cash, and also to terrify and neutralize the opposition inside Iran. And Giselle knows more. There were hundreds and thousands of people, of demonstrators, who happened to be in Iran, so it's easier to capture them. But they came, as she said, they came to Los Angeles. They came to California, tried to kill him and the family. And then they missed him in many places. So my question myself, and I hope Congress will investigate this matter, how come an intelligence service from inside the regime will go to a third country or fourth country, the UAE, to Dubai, extract him from the city, from the hotel, take him through two other countries, the UAE and Oman, into Iran without us knowing? That is a question I don't have an answer for. How can that be? We have the most powerful intelligence service in the world. And also the local Arab countries have very advanced intelligence services. So there must be an answer for that. And second, they'll keep him 4 years from 2020 and the 4 years of the Biden administration. And as she mentioned, in his family, I know everybody in Europe at least knows that more than here, there was a refusal to release him. It's not that, oh, we counted 5, there was no seat for the 6th. That's not how it happened. There was a decision not to release him because he could create a message, not just to the Iranian people, but to the American people, that this regime is criminal. And then, if you want, we could discuss, after the collapse of Assad, who's going to come to Syria. These are the other jihadists, and there is no guarantee that they won't act the same way the Khomeini jihadists act.
Yeah, let me ask you that point real quickly, Dr. Perez. The jihadists who have taken over Syria, while people are celebrating, some of them are still uncertain about what their future will look like. What should the United States be looking at when we know that President Biden has said this is justice, but at the same time, he's concerned about what this group will do in the future? What should President-elect Donald Trump be considering as well as our allies in Israel?
Absolutely. Look, when it comes to celebration, I fully understand what Syrians, what Lebanese are celebrating. Why? Because they have been brutalized for so long. I have exited Lebanon in the end of 1990 because I was threatened by the Bashar Al Assad regime, by Hezbollah. So I have a personal linkage to that. But at the same time, I look at the future. Yes, one dragon is down. The other one is coming to take over. And I think the Israelis, by the way, who acted and are acting very quickly, when the Assad units started to withdraw in southern Syria, they're not going to let the jihadists come closer. They moved first. They went up to the Hermon Mount. They moved up to the Druze areas because they know what's coming at the horizons, from the horizons. So the problem is now we have one regime going down. We have the build-up of the next regime, which is jihadist. It just happened that they are Khomeinists, and Bashar Al Assad is Khomeinists, and the incoming jihadi force are Salafi jihadists. I mean, these are technical terms, but we are dealing with the same beast, which is the jihadism. And you mentioned something very important. Who will be the victims? The Kurds, the Christians, the Druze, and even the Alawis. When they lost their position, the Alawi population, they will all be threatened. And we've seen this. This is not something new. We've seen it in 2012, 13, 14. You and I discussed it many times. It's like we're going back 10 years in time, and we see the same threat coming to us. Unfortunately, and as both of you have mentioned, there were mistakes made by previous administrations. I mean, the Obama call for a cooperation with the Ayatollah in 2009 to get the deal in 2015. And of course, the Obama speech in Cairo to connect with the Muslim Brotherhood. And of course, the Biden release of or removal of the Houthis from the U.S. terror list. as soon as he entered the White House. All of these are catastrophic decisions. So now back to our new administration, incoming administration. Well, the president-elect issued already 2 tweets, very, very limited, but he is signifying to the other side that there are things not going to stay where. Number one, yes, he said this is not our war, but he said our allies will count. And that is a very important. If our allies are threatened, unlike in the past, we will be with them. And he mentions, of course, the Israelis, they mentioned the Kurds. So I can anticipate between now and January the 20th, his new team is very sensitive and very aware that the Islamic regime in Iran is not our friend. We're not going to have any deal with them. We're not going to send $1, not $150 billion, not send $1. We're going to be standing with the Kurd minorities, Israel, and of course the Arab Sunni Muslims of the Arab coalition. There is a vision coming, and I'm wondering what both dragons now in the Middle East to confront the new administration. That would be my question.
So look, this is a very complex, convoluted mess, if you will, where you have, as you stated, 2 dragons that have flexed their muscles. We know that Iran has its proxies operating to do more harm to people living in Israel, as well as Hezbollah disrupting the lives of Christians and peace-loving people in Lebanon. We know that Iran, Giselle, has a movement that's underground where Christians are rising up and actually giving their belief to God. I mean, where does faith come into this equation, given the fact that you've seen how brutal these regimes can be and how menacing these ISIS-based groups and Taliban-type groups are towards Christians, towards even Muslims who don't adhere to their way of life. Explain to me what you're going through as you look at Syria right now in a vacuum of leadership and knowing that it can be drawn into something more sinister.
Yeah, and you brought up the subject of faith and culture and the people. It's not just, as you said, minorities like Christian, Druze, Kurds, Zoroastrians, and Jews in the Middle East that are killed, systematically killed, not just like killed by accident, systematically oppressed and killed by the jihadists. The jihadists killed more Muslims than anybody else, so they're also a threat. Sorry, to the moderate, just regular Muslim people. The people of Iran, I'm so sorry, the people of Iran by culture, we have a very long, like 6,000-year culture and history. We're closer to the Christian faith. That's why we have these underground communities that are going back to Christian faith and Zoroastrian faith. We used to be Zoroastrians, which is very close to Christianity. And the values that we hold are still standing with the oppressed, speaking up in the face of injustice, truth seeking instead of the lies that we see of jihad. So this is the spirit of the Iranian people that could never be crushed. In the last 45 years that the Islamic regime took over Iran, they tried with all force, with executions, with death sentences, with lashes, with prison sentences, with rape, with murder, with kidnappings, like in the case of my father, to oppress the people and to have them comply with a regime that is all powerful. And the people showed, we are not with you. How do we know that? Just this year, they had a presidential election. I put it in quotes because there is no elections inside of Iran. But the people boycotted the elections to show we are against you. They cannot go on the streets and say we're against you because they're being shot. So by boycotting and showing the numbers, how many people took part in this selection or election and how many people boycotted, we were able to get the exact numbers of 90% of the population standing against the regime even though they're unarmed, they're going to the streets, having revolution after revolution, uprising after uprising. The same is true in other parts of the Middle East, in Syria and Lebanon and so on. What the media presents, what the jihadists present is of course, no, all of the people under this rule, they are with us. But if they were with us or with them, they didn't need to oppress them in such a way as they are doing right now. So this is very important for us to know. There are large communities inside of Iran, inside of Syria, that are against both of these dragons. They're against the HTS, the Sunni jihadists. They're against the Shia jihadists. They need our support. They need not just military support, they need our full support of standing with them and helping them. And more importantly, we have to stop the financing and negotiations and financial aid and whatever you call it that is going to the jihadist powers, that is going to Qatar, that is going to Turkey, that is going to the Islamic regime, that is going to Hamas through UNRWA. So we exposed all of these ways that these jihadists are making money, be it through the Obama deal, $150 billion being released, being through hostage negotiations where $6 billion are released, be it through humanitarian aid and all of these things. These are just fronts. We have to understand these are fronts to hold these regimes in power. And that's where we have the power of our next administration to cut these ties and let the regimes suffer economically, and the people of Iran will take care of them, because we have seen over and over again that they're ready to go into the streets, risk life and limb, like my father did, to take this regime down. So we have an army over there that is our allies, and that's important to understand.
Thank you for that, Giselle. And Walid, as she's talking, I couldn't help but think the fact that she's talking about Iran and Syria, but most notably, if you look at Iran's regime, this is a regime that even threatened to assassinate President-elect Donald Trump. You have advised the Trump administration in the past. How do you see the Trump administration dealing with Iran and then ultimately dealing with Syria in the future?
Well, with regard to the Islamic regime in Iran, the current team that was appointed, nominated by the president, I must say, is a different caliber than previous teams before, but many are coming from the first administration, and they are very good as well. What they understand, that team, and therefore the president, understand that the Islamic regime is actually ideologically bent on destroying the way of life that we have and eventually democracy and freedom. So to go cut another deal with the Ayatollahs is not going to do anything. What we need to do, I don't want to say it that way, is to cut a deal with the Iranian people, is to actually start supporting the Iranian people with all of its communities and ethnicities and religions, because that's the guarantee. I have my word about this transaction called the Iran deal we've been talking about. It's a transaction. Transaction meaning we will send them frozen money. They will use it to modernize Iran and liberalize Iran. What did they do in 10, 15 years? Just the opposite. They cut the money, didn't do anything for the Iranian people, of course. Bought the weapons, armed the militias, tried to assassinate people, tried to kidnap people, and at the same time cut deals with China and Russia and North Korea. So it was a mother of all mistakes what the Biden administration has done in 2015 and 15, not just to sue them and with the Muslim Brotherhood, but actually to send them money. And you know what? There is no money sent with that dimension without brokers. So if you calculate 10% of 150%, $50 billion, that's $15 billion. $15 billion floating internationally, being used by that regime. You know what they can do? They could influence Western Europe. They can influence our media, our academia. So there was another war taking place, which is the money of the brokers of the Iran deal. So the first commitment of a second Trump administration, and he's to the money, he calculated very well, that is to cut any transfer of money to that regime. I mean, if we don't do this, we're not doing anything. And second one needs to be debated further in our Congress with the administration is look at ways to support the Iranian people who can, as Giselle just said right now, and many other Iranian leaders, Iranian American leaders, the Iranian people can bring down that regime, can reform in the sense, change it completely and come with another formula for Iran.
My final question then, I mean, I could go longer, but as this goes on, we'll stay in touch with each other. The incoming rulers in Syria, they seem to be, as we've talked about, jihadists and Islamic extremists, no different than what we've seen in Iran, no different than what we've seen with the proxies of Iran. What do you expect to happen? And you've talked about it a little bit, Waleed, in terms of what President-elect Trump may do. From both of your vantage points, where do you see changes taking place, not only in Iran, but also in Syria?
Well, the first move is Israelis. It's a good move. I assume the public heard or saw Prime Minister Netanyahu immediately talking about after the collapse of the Assad regime. He said, we don't know, or we may have a risk to learn that those marching into Damascus and then will be marching towards the south, towards Israel. So we're taking all the measures we can. Everywhere you have a Syrian force or Bashar unit withdrawing, the Israelis are taking over. Because if they don't, Assad is going to come closer and become the next enemy on the Golan Heights. That's not going to happen. But a second matter, which is very important, and Bibi Netanyahu, thought about it, is there are minorities in Syria. Some of these minorities are basically still resisting the Kurds. The Kurds will not make any concession. The Druze who are, in the vicinity of Israel will stand. And every other, the Christians, there are many Christians now in the Kurdish area. So the vision of Israel at this point in time is to create this corridor. I wish we had the map. Giselle and I created a map for the public to understand. We'll send it to you for other segments, whereby from the Golan Heights, a line will go to Tanf base between Jordan and Syria, and all the way a highway will link them to the Kurdish areas. That's an earthquake if that happens. It will cut off any communication between the militias inside Iraq and the forthcoming militias of the jihadists. But let's keep something in mind. The Arab coalition is the most threatened by these jihadists. I mean, those coming to Damascus, they know they're going to have a hard time fighting against Israel. They know the minorities will seek support from Israel. But Saudi Arabia, Egypt, UAE, Bahrain, all that coalition actually launched by the first Trump administration is now going to look at Israel, at these minorities, and at the United States as the next coalition. So something good may come out of this something bad that happened in Syria last week.
Look, I want to thank you both. Waleed Phares, former advisor to President Donald Trump, foreign policy expert as well, based in Washington, D.C., a professor there. You have served this country extremely well, and you're the co-host of War and Freedom podcast. And your colleague, Giselle Shermad, freedom advocate, daughter of German-American journalist Jimmy Shermad, executed by the Iranian regime. Both of you have given us so much insight in this short time that we've spoken. Giselle, you have not received your father's body back. The United States has demanded it. There is still much to be done and much to be discussed, as we're just in the beginning throes of the fall of Assad and what it means for Syria. But certainly you've shown quite a bit of light on what's happening there and how it impacts Iran as well as Israel and the entire Middle East. I want to thank you both for taking the time out to talk to me about educating America on, as I stated before, a very convoluted mess that has to be sorted out because Americans don't understand what jihad really fully means and how it's implemented with all these different dragons as you've talked about. Thank you both, Waleed and Giselle. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kenny.
We'll be talking again, I'm sure.
Do you think I can do 1 minute or 2 minutes? Yes.
Sure.
Just a very important point on educating America, and maybe you can use that in the future. We are very sensitive when people call it the Iranian regime. Why? Because these people that took over Iran in 1979 are not Iranian. They're actually anti-Iranian. when the Ayatollahs came to Iran or took over Iran, seized power over our land, Ayatollah Khomeini said, and that's a very famous quote of him, "I will let Iran burn to enlight the flame of Islam all over the world." So this is the kind of people that are taking over Iran. The Iranian people are against them because they are first and foremost enemies of Iranian. They replaced our constitution, our Iranian constitution, with a Sharia law. They replaced our ministries with their terror hubs. They replaced our language with Arabic. They replaced our flag with an Islamist flag. They replaced everything, our culture, our people, our everything with jihadist Islamist culture and values, which is absolutely foreign to the Iranian people. Why is this very important? It's not just like that we feel insulted. It is the game of the jihadists to take over nations and claim us as theirs. They have been very successful in doing that because the West accepted them, while the people of Iran never accepted them. The West accepted them as a state. That gives these jihadists the power and perks of being a state. That means diplomatic immunity. The terrorists can go over there, all over the world without being arrested. That gives them the perks of doing negotiations, coming to the UN, having a vote at the UN. And so it comes with a lot of perks that other jihadist groups, as we just mentioned, HTS wants to probably create their own state and have these same perks. Hamas probably wants to create their own state. Hezbollah wants to create their own state. And that is something that we have to push against and say these are not states, these are not diplomats, they're criminals, just disguised as a nation's leaders, and we're not falling for that. Why is it also important to the American people to understand that? As I said, Iran has thousands of years of history. They were able to change everything that we have within one generation. So what happened to Iran, what happened in the Middle East, taking over Afghanistan and all of these nations by jihadists, can happen to America, is happening to America. As Walid just said, they have infiltrated our academia, our State Department, our Pentagon, everywhere. They have their people here that not just threaten my father and Iranian dissidents and want to execute them and assassinate them, but even presidents, even our presidents are not safe here. So they are already here. They know that they can do to America what they did to Iran if they crumble our nation, our culture, our identity from within. That's why it's very important for us, for you to distinguish between Iran, the nation, and the Islamic regime that is occupying Iran right now.
And Syria. Thank you both. Thank you both.
And
Giselle,
Syria.
Walid.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.